Greetings, fellow followers of the stars. This is Rick Levine welcoming you into 2023. This is the forecast, the astrological forecast for January of 2023. And before we get into the material, I do have a few announcements. I'd like to start off by inviting you all to a free event. Many of you know that back in December, I did a talk for the Washington State Astrology Association on the astrology of 2023, a general overview for the entire year. Many of you attended that through Zoom, through an online link, and many of you did not. Those who did not have been asking me for this, and so I am announcing that on January 21st, that's a Saturday at noon Pacific time, that's 3 p.m. Eastern time, and adjust your time zone accordingly, I will be doing a live webinar on the astrology of 2023. I will have a link available for this in the mid-month forecast, which this month, as many of you know, that normally only goes out to my Patreon subscribers. January, as a welcome to the new year, I will be offering it to everyone, and I will have the link for that event in my January mid-month update. So that'll be available to you on YouTube, and look for that mid-month, and I hope to see you for the free event. By the way, the event will be limited to 1,500 people, so the first 1,500 people who arrive will be there. If it reaches that many, I have no idea, but there is a limitation there. It will be available on YouTube as a freebie also later on. Okay, enough on that. Secondly, and very excited about this one, you guys asked for it, and we are doing a special Astrology Foundations Level 3, which is stepping beyond the basics and looking, this will be a 5-week course on harmonic aspects. And so for those of you who are interested in quintiles and septiles and more, this workshop or this course will be available to you. There's a wait list right now available. Open enrollment has not started, but if you want to be informed of the details as they unfold, you can go to astrologyhub.com/foundations3, that's number 3, wait list, all one word. astrologyhub.com /foundations3 wait list. And, you asked for it. You got it. This is, a lot of people have been asking for this for a long time. And there'll be information available to you, and then you can enroll when actual open enrollment starts. But if you're interested in being informed and kept informed about this, this course will actually unfold and will be offered in February. But you can't sign up for it yet, but you can sign up for the wait list. Okay, that's next. Also, I will be down in Los Angeles for the Conscious Life Expo on February 10th through the 12th, and on the 13th I'll be doing a special workshop there. You can go to the Conscious Life Expo website and find the full calendar of events. This is an amazing event. There are thousands of people there. It's at the Los Angeles Hilton, at the LAX Hilton, and it's a big deal, and I'm doing a number of things on the program, and then a post-workshop, and you can find out information by going to the Conscious Life Expo webpage. Okay, like I said, I had a few events, but we're going to get through them. Next, I would like to remind you all, or let you know, that I'll be involved in 2 events this year at the Omega Institute. The Omega Institute is in Rhinebeck, New York. It's just north of New York City. It's an incredible, I say just north, it's about maybe an hour and a half or 2. It's an incredibly magical and beautiful place. and I'll be doing a weekend event there called Astrology, Consciousness, and the Great Shift. I will be joined this weekend by Maurice Fernandez, Lynn Bell, Rachel Lang, and Ann Orderly. And it should be a magical and fun weekend, and information for this is available through the Omega Institute. For those of you who can't make that event and would like to explore the magic of Omega, I'll be doing a separate event with Rachel Lang on October 13th through 15th, and that workshop weekend will be all about Venus, and it'll be an experiential and in-depth look at the magic and creating magic with Venus. That's that. The last thing I want to mention is a reminder, although we don't have more information available yet, it will begin appearing in the next few weeks. I will be doing a 10-day retreat in Goa, India, with Heaven and Earth workshops. They're the folks that have put on pretty much all of my international events over the years leading up to the pandemic restrictions. And this will be December 6th through the 16th. And Goa is an incredible place. It's a little bit different than the rest of India. I'll have more to say on this later, but for now, put in the back of your mind, Goa, India, December 6th through the 16th. And it's going to be an amazing week. I've done an event prior at this place. It's a Ayurvedic healing center in the southern part of Goa. The beaches are amazing. The facilities are incredible. And I look forward to seeing many of you there. I think that pretty much does it. Oh, and a quick reminder to a free monthly event, and that is my return to the Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington on the first Friday night of every month. For those of you who are watching this early enough in the month, I will be there on Friday night, January 6th. And then I will be there also on Friday night, February 3rd is the first Friday night in February. And this is basically a live presentation of the astrology of what's going on these days, usually focused on the month ahead. But a live event is a lot of fun. These events are enjoyable. If you are in the area, please stop by, and that's at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond. Just as a point of interest, it was doing these events back 12, 13 years ago where we began. I began doing these monthly talks with Jeff Jower, my then astrology buddy and partner, who passed over about 6 years ago. Has it been that long? Wow. And that turned into something that we began putting up on YouTube that turned into these monthly forecasts. So for those of you in the area, I invite you, and please stop by. And that is it for announcements. Okay. Now for the real work of why we are here. And we are obviously here to talk about the astrology of January. And the thing about January is that we are further separating from the past. I think November, December were strong statements of where we are moving. And these are still pretty crazy times, and that craziness is not going to settle down as quickly as some of us might like. However, the period of time from the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January of 2020 through that 2020 year of Jupiter conjuncting Pluto, and then the Great Conjunction, which was the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the end of the year, and then moving into 2021 and 2022, where we had an ongoing dance of the old versus the new, or the progressive, Uranus versus Saturn, the restrictive and or stable. And we've finally moved beyond all that. As those of you who have been watching this forecast regularly know that November, around Election Day, that eclipse on Election Day in the United States was really a seminal marker, a turning point. And since then, we have been moving further and further away from those events of 2020, 2021, and even into 2022. The thing, though, to understand as we move into 2023 is that Mars, which had turned retrograde the end of October and has been retrograde since then, remains retrograde all the way through January 12th. And what's significant about that is that even though we're past the turning point and we're moving forward, the fact is that we still have an anchor, a personal anchor, an energetic anchor. Mars is still hanging out in areas where it was prior to this whole period of time, and that's significant. We'll come back to that in just a moment. The other thing that is significant as we move into 2023 is that it may feel like we're getting off to a start that might feel like a little bit on either on the wrong foot, or like that saying of getting out of bed on the wrong side. What is that? Getting up on the wrong side of the bed, something like that. It might feel like that because we also begin the year with Mercury having just turned retrograde. Now, Mercury having just turned retrograde is a kind of like a boost to the Mars retrograde, even though the Mars retrograde is nearing its end. And so as we move through the first part of January, the first couple of weeks of January, although the outer planets are largely all moving direct, I think right now with the exception of Uranus, which turns direct later this month, that we still have this little kind of backwash going on, this little pull with Mars not releasing its energy, and now Mercury adding to that mix, and Mercury actually turning direct on the 18th. So I think we're going to feel quite a bit more movement as we get to the end of the month. But even with that, it's going to take a little time for those planets turning direct. That'll be Mars and Mercury. It'll take a little time for them to build up their normal steam. So let me start off here kind of giving a review of the Mars picture, because it's so interesting, it's so important, and it's adding so much, I think, especially to our frustration of why aren't things moving faster? Why can't we get beyond what we're stuck in? Why is it that we're still doing, in some ways, the same things, even though we might feel like they're in the past? And this is both personally and globally. These events affect us at all levels. But with a quick review on the Mars thing, we have Mars having moved into Gemini back in August, which means that Mars will have been in Gemini all of September, October, November, December, January, February, and it's not until the end of March when Mars leaves Gemini and moves into Cancer. Now, normally Mars spends about 7 weeks in each sign, and now it's spending 7 months in the sign of Gemini. So the Mars retrograde is very powerful because it really puts an anchor onto things. It's almost like Mars turns into Saturn. It's not quite the same thing, but that Mars retrograde, like Saturn, really puts limits on how fast we can move forward, how we can move forward at all, for that matter. And Mars actually moved into its shadow on September 3rd. So we've been living under the influence with Mars going all the way back to the beginning of September, and we will until Mars clears its shadow all the way toward the beginning of March. Actually, I think it leaves its shadow. Yeah, right, no, actually, the end of March. So here's what happens. Mars actually began to slow down, and it turned retrograde the end of October, and it did that at 25 degrees of Gemini. And then it retrogrades all the way back to 8 degrees of Gemini. So anybody who has any planets within that 25 degrees and 8 degrees of Gemini, or any mutable planets, is being affected by this retrograde. Certainly, whether you do or not, you're still being affected by it, or we all are. But with people with planets in that particular range are the ones that are getting really personally informed of the intensity of this Mars retrograde. Now, here's the thing to understand about January. We begin the month with Mars at just retrograding back into 8 degrees of Gemini. It's actually at 8 degrees and 56 minutes of Gemini on the 1st of March. Mars backs up in the first 2 weeks of January. Mars will back up to 8 degrees and 8 minutes of Gemini. And that's where it makes its station, and it begins to move forward again. But the thing is that at the beginning of the month, Mars is at 8 degrees 56 minutes of Gemini, and at the end of the month, Mars is just barely moved a degree and a half. In fact, by January 24th, Mars is still at 8 degrees of Gemini. And it reaches into 9 degrees of Gemini on the 24th. And then by February 1st, it's at 10 degrees of Gemini, but it doesn't move into Cancer until the end of March. Here's why this is important. Everybody's making a big deal out of things are going to break loose and things are going to change and everything's going to move forward as Mars turns direct on January 12th. There may be some events that precipitate out of this change of direction. However, it'll take Mars nearly a month for it to regain its normal speed. And so even when Mars is going forward, it's going forward in an area of sky where it's already been forward and backward, and now it's going forward again. We're going to still feel like Groundhog Day. We're going to still feel like we're not making as much progress as we thought we might. On the other hand, we can use this period of time after Mars turns direct on January 12th. We can use this period of time to consciously look back to, all the way back to September, October, November, December of 2022 and think about what projects that we have, what things have we started, what loose and untied, loose ends and untied, unfinished business can we tie up? Because it's really significant that during this Mars retrograde period, beginning in mid-January, that we use the next several weeks, the next 6 weeks actually, to tie up all those loose ends. So by the time Mars moves forward into Cancer on March 25th, we are actually freed from all these things that have been holding us back, and we're ready to move into new territory. So that's the Mars story, and it's hugely significant. And remember, Mars is barely moving a degree and a half for the entire month of January. In fact, it's moving less than a degree in the first 3 weeks of January. And so we might feel stuck. We might feel frustrated. We might feel like things are not gaining traction, that we want to move forward, and they events like that, they in their own world will create a level of frustration where we can get angry without necessarily having a valid reason. Or even if we feel that our reason is valid, the anger can create its own scenario, and it's important during these last weeks of Mars retrograde and the first weeks of Mars direct for us to remember to keep our anger in check. Anger has a purpose. But if it's just an impulsive blowing off steam at a wrong event, whether it's an unnecessary ego engagement or something, these things are of no value at all and, in fact, can be quite detrimental. Now, into that, let's add the Mercury retrograde, because Mercury, which turned retrograde just a couple days ago, I am recording this on the 31st, it turned retrograde on the 29th. Mercury of December, that is. Mercury remains retrograde all the way through the 18th. Mercury is normally a 3-week, give or take, a day or two retrograde. This is a relatively fast retrograde period, and it will turn direct on January 18th. Now, the thing about a retrograde planet, and I've talked about this many times from many different directions, but I want to spend a moment about this Mercury right now, because this Mercury retrograde, in fact, all the retrogrades through 2023 are taking place in Earth signs. This one has taken place or is taking place in the sign of Capricorn. And so we begin the year with Mercury at at 23 degrees of Capricorn, and Mercury retrogrades all the way back to 8 degrees of Capricorn. So this entire Mercury retrograde phase is tied up in the sign of Capricorn. Now, again, those of you or those of us with planets between 8 and 23 degrees of Capricorn are being specifically called out by this Mercury retrograde. But then again, any of us with planets between 8 and 23 degrees of any cardinal sign, Aries or Cancer or Libra or Capricorn, are going to be affected by this retrograde, because this retrograde will go across and then back over and then across again planets in our natal chart by conjunction, opposition, or square. And so this retrograde is also interesting because of the number of aspects it makes with other planets in the sky that are repeated 3 times. Normally, when Mercury moves through the sky, let's say it conjoins or squares a planet, it normally does that once a year. But when it retrogrades over that particular point, Mercury will line up with a planet or make an aspect with it, then it retrogrades and makes that aspect again, and then it goes direct and makes it again a third and final time. Now, why this is so significant is it makes an event which is normally 1 day or 2 long stretch out over a longer period of time that gives a different weight to that event. And the primary aspects that Mercury is making 3 times is, first of all, Mercury formed a half square with Saturn back on December 12th. Let me just list these out, and then I'll list them again as they're occurring in January. Mercury made a half square with Saturn on January 12th. On December 10th, and that is often just a difficult day in communications. Our words run into walls, if you will. On December 14th, Mercury squared Chiron, and that may have been a day where we either felt under the weather or had some words that didn't sit easily with others. On December 17th, Mercury formed a trine with Uranus. This is wild and exciting, and we're discussing things that are outside our normal realm of limitations. We're thinking things that are new and different. And then on Christmas Eve, Mercury formed a sextile with Neptune. This is a bit dreamy. It's a bit... imagination, it begins to flourish. And because that Mercury turned retrograde on the 29th, as Mercury begins going backwards, it'll play these events in reverse, so that on the first day of January, Mercury again is forming a sextile with Neptune. Now, this is kind of sweet because it's the same fantasy and dreams that were feeding us on Christmas Eve are feeding us again on New Year's Day. There is an exception, or at least a noted difference of these dreams on New Year's Day because of the conjunction between Venus and Pluto that was on New Year's Eve late last night, and we're going to swing back to that in a moment when we actually look at charts. But the fact is that Mercury retrograde first retrogrades through that sextile with Neptune, and this heightens our ability to use our imagination and our dreams. By January 8th, Mercury has retrograded back to the trine to Uranus, and again, we're breaking out of our restraints intellectually, mentally. We're excited about things that are new and different. And then by January 11th, Mercury is squaring Chiron again, another difficult issue around some limitation or healing that may play back to what was going on in mid-December when Mercury squared Chiron for the first time. And then Mercury forms on January 14th. Mercury forms its semi-square again with Saturn, again restrictions in communication. Now, as Mercury moves then direct after the 18th, it's going to play all these events back in reverse again the third and final time. So Mercury makes its third and final semi-square with Saturn on the 23rd. Again, difficulty in communication, or at least limited communication in some form. On January 27th, it squares Chiron, and this is a chance for us to resolve that which was blocking our energy, or those things which in some way were referring to old hurts or wounds that perhaps were getting in the way of a present expression. And then on January 29th, Uranus makes its third and final trine, Mercury makes its third and final trine with Uranus. And again, this is freedom of thinking. This is exciting. This is delving into new territory. And it's not until February that Mercury makes that third and final sextile with Neptune, actually February 6th. And then Mercury moves on. Actually, Mercury moves into Aquarius on February 11th. We'll get there in February. So this thing about Mars and Mercury together, the reason why we're spending so much time with them is that they are really the crux of what's going on in the month of January, while at the same time other things are pushing us into the future, and that's where the excitement begins. So let's bring up a chart for January 1st, 2023. And we can see, as I said before, that Mercury is at 23 degrees of Capricorn, the Sun mid-Capricorn, 11 degrees of Capricorn, with Venus just having conjoined Pluto. And in fact, that happened on New Year's Eve. I said we'd swing back around and talk about it, and now we will. So Venus and Pluto are an interesting mixture, because Venus is often light and sweet and yummy and pleasant, and Venus is our attractions and our desires, and often related to love. And Pluto is dark and deep. And it reminds me of a book that Thomas More, the guy who wrote the books on soul, soulmates, and care of the soul, and those books, wrote a book called Dark Eros. And in it, he talks about how love isn't always bright and easy. And in fact, when you buy into real love, you have to move past, or we need to move past the surface and experience both love in its light and beautiful form and in its shadow form. And often when Venus joins up with Pluto, the darker energy can come out. Or if it's not darker, at least it's more intense. This is heightened passion. And passion, of course, can mean jealousy. It can mean other things. But I think that the Venus conjunction to Pluto, even though it occurred last night, meaning on New Year's Eve, it's still with us today on January 1st. And the other thing, of course, that is affecting us today on January 1st, aside from all these planets in Capricorn, is the fact that the sun is also making a square with Chiron. It's not exact until tomorrow, but we're feeling it today. And we're feeling also the Mercury the Mercury sextile Neptune, which I had mentioned earlier. And so we have this thing of illusions and fantasies that are driving us and maybe even pulling us in the wrong direction. It's an interesting dance. The moon on January 1st is moving through Taurus, and it catches up with Uranus midday. And so there is some excitement, there is some breaking free, but there's kind of this undertone of the day of things being kind of not as easy or as right as we might like them to be, even though we can escape from that by using not only the moon in Taurus conjoining Uranus, but even the fact that the sun over the next several days will be moving toward an exact trine with Uranus. And we can feel that now. We feel that there's new stuff happening, and it's a bit frustrating that we're not getting the full benefits of whatever these new things are that are right around the corner. So as we move forward, on January 2nd, we get the exact square of the Sun to Chiron, and we also get Venus moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. Now, this really is a strong flavor for the month. It's the first of the inner planets. In this case, those inner planets will be Venus followed by Mercury, if it ever gets out of its retrograde. That won't be for a while. But Venus, Mercury, and the Sun, they will move each into Aquarius, and they will each in turn lighten up the harder energy, the more serious, the more pragmatic, the more down-to-earth and responsible energy of Capricorn. And so as Venus moves from Capricorn into Aquarius on January 2nd, we might feel a bit lighter, a bit easier. This is about what we like and what feels good to us, and it kind of takes it out of the personal realm and puts it more into a sense of community or wider family, friends, and so on. And of course, for many people, this is a back-to-work day where we're moving outside of the family issues that perhaps we've been enmeshed in during the holiday season, and then going back into a work environment where things are perhaps less emotional. And I think that Venus in Aquarius is or tends to be a bit less emotional. It's more conceptual than emotional. By January 4th, we have the Sun making the exact trine with Uranus. It's not exact until early on the 5th. But the Sun is trining Uranus, and Venus is forming a sextile with Jupiter. I think the 4th and the 5th are exciting days. I think that they're days where there's lots of movement, lots of energy. We're feeling things picking up. We're getting a buzz off of this. This is Wednesday, January 4th, and Thursday, January 5th. And we're moving toward the full moon. The moon right now is moving on January 4th and 5th through Gemini, and the moon moves into Cancer actually on the 5th, and the full moon occurs on the 6th. It occurs at 3:07 p.m. That's Pacific time, so it's 6:07 p.m. Eastern time, and adjust your time for your time zone. This full moon is intriguing because of two things. Number one, the full moon in Cancer, the moon is in its domicile. It's at home in Cancer. And it's not only opposing the Sun, it's also opposing the Sun and Mercury. Retrograde Mercury is coming into a conjunction with the Sun. That conjunction with the Sun is exact on tomorrow on the 7th. And so the full moon is not only opposed the Sun, giving us this wide tension, dilemma between how we feel personally and what we should be doing in the outer world, but that Mercury in some ways is giving us the ability to intellectualize, if not express, what it is that needs to be done in the outer world, even though we may be holding some of those thoughts in because of the opposition to that moon in Cancer. It doesn't want to be exposed. Now, the other piece of this that is so significant is that this full moon is forming a sextile with Uranus, which actually means that Uranus is at the point of Thales of the opposition between the moon in Cancer and the sun and Mercury in Capricorn. What this means is this is exciting. Remember, we've had the sun moving toward that trine to Uranus, and in a way, this is like a something breaking free with relative ease. Interestingly enough, there's a sense here of a smooth expression of dramatic change, which I know sounds counterintuitive and oxymoronic, but the point is that Uranus here is facilitating the breaking out of this constriction. Now, there still is a bit of constriction from this full moon with the retrograde Mercury lining up with the sun in Capricorn. And we have additionally the full moon being square to Chiron. Now, in some ways, the moon actually is already square Chiron, maybe 4 or 5 hours before the moon is actually full. And the sun is already done squaring Chiron too. So that square may not be hugely impactful, but it does indicate the exposing of some hurt, some wound, some problem, some situations that aren't resolved, that again, the sudden movement of Uranus might release those tensions and actually move to resolve them. The other thing to keep in mind is that over the next few days, we have Venus moving into a trine with Mars backing into that trine that's exact on January 9th. We'll see that in just a moment. But in the interim, we have Mercury backing into its trine with Uranus. And if you remember, I talked about that Mercury trine Uranus earlier because Mercury trined Uranus back mid-December, and now it's doing it on the retrograde for the second time. And in fact, it will do it on the direct for the third and final time, the end of the month on the 28th. And so we have this new way of thinking. We're breaking out of our old stuck ways. Something is happening that's like lightning striking and making our mind open up so that we can see things in ways that we hadn't seen them before. And of course, once you see something in a new way, whether you would like it or not, once the lightning passes, you still know what it is. You can still have the picture in your mind's eye. And so this period of time, including this full moon on the 6th, all the way through the Mercury trining Uranus on the 8th, and culminating, I think, in this nice balance between Venus and Mars on the 9th, this is a wake-up call. This is about something happening that's not difficult. It's not problematic. And in some ways, even if there are problematic issues, that we have tools in order to solve them or to resolve these issues. This is a pretty exciting time, and I think remains so. The 10th gets a little bit trickier as Venus moves into the bending, and it hits the point that's squaring the north and south node, and that's followed then by on the 11th and 12th. Venus forms a sextile with Chiron. This is actually smooth. This is, again, a solution to things that have been problematic. But remember, even though Mars is turning direct on the 12th, it's not moving. Or it's moving so barely slowly that we're not feeling the relief that we'd like to, although we may get a hit of something. In fact, so Mars makes its station and theoretically begins to move direct. Well, it actually does, but it only moves like a minute of arc over the next 24 hours. And during this period of time, we also have the Sun by the 13th making a sextile with Neptune, and this is kind of on the back of that Mercury sextile Neptune that was active on Christmas Eve and New Year's Day. And so we're getting another replay into the fantasy, and yet this one might feel a little bit clearer or a little bit cleaner, so to speak. The Sun is also making a sesqui-square, that's a square and a half with Mars. That's exact on the 13th. And so we do have on the 13th a bit of again, I think it's frustrating. I was going to say annoying energy. It's deeper than annoying. It's anxiety producing. It's not comfortable, but it has movement. And that's the important thing to keep in mind, that during this time, these things are actually moving. It might not feel like they're moving fast enough. Now, Mercury, however, is still retrograde, and Mercury retrogrades back into its half square with Saturn, which we mentioned earlier, also on the 14th. And on the 14th also, we have Venus making a square with Uranus. Now, Uranus stays in the picture, and Uranus is playing a big picture these days. Remember, all through 2021-22, we had this dance of Saturn holding back, Venus blowing through, this kind of restraint explosion, holding it in and then moving it outward suddenly. And on January 13th, we actually have Venus moving into the position where Saturn was when it was squaring Uranus. And so this can be very exciting if we're willing to let go, because Venus square Uranus is like a sudden opening of the floodgate of emotion, of excitement, of attachment, of desire, and that's from Venus, and yet there's the detachment from Uranus, and it can be a bit disorienting, but it also can be really exciting. If you're into adrenaline rushes, this January 13th can certainly be that with the Venus square Uranus. It's actually exact on the 14th, but we're going to be feeling it already on the 13th. And is going to be like this whole holding back, and then kapow. And by the 14th, we're feeling that, and yet we also have the Saturn making the half square with Mercury, or that is Mercury making the half square with Saturn. And so what happens is, this is like an instant replay of 2021-22, when we had this Saturn-Uranus conflict of Saturn being the old and the stable and the conservative, and Uranus being the progressive and the blow it all open and just make it happen. And so January 13th, 14th becomes a little dance between the two of those, because we have Venus squaring Uranus at the same time as we have that retrograde Mercury forming a half square with Saturn. As we move forward, we get to the 17th, and the 17th is actually I think a bit of relief, because we have a Venus-Jupiter half square. Now, normally half squares are anxious, and this might be also, but because they're two happy planets, or happy, beneficent planets, they are Venus and Jupiter, are the benefics, the greater benefic Jupiter, now in Aries, and the lesser benefic Venus moving through Aquarius. And as they make this half square, there's a sense of perhaps overdoing the potential of doing too much, of taking on too much, But this indulgence can certainly be enjoying in the process. It can be, pleasing. It can be an experience that is really nice, as long as we don't push that extreme, that indulgence too far. And it's easy to do this because if something is feeling good, we are often tempted to push that envelope and take it farther. Now, the other thing that's cooking on the 17th, actually exact on the 18th, is the fact that Mercury is making its station. And Mercury's station direct is an end to this kind of personal planet retrograde phase that we've been in, with Mercury and Mars handing off the baton for the retrograde energy. Now that even though Mars is moving direct, it's barely moved a quarter of a degree since it turned direct a week ago. And now Mercury stations to move direct. And it is a change, but the energy doesn't loosen as fast as we would like it to. Now, one thing that does occur on the 18th, while all this other stuff is going on, is that the sun moving through the latter degrees of Capricorn catches up with Pluto at 28 degrees of Capricorn, and it does this on the 18th. And remember, on New Year's Eve, Venus was lined up with Pluto at the end of Capricorn, and intensifying our feelings. Well, we're getting a second run of this, and with a similarity of events, the sun aligning or conjoining Pluto is shining the light, the sun. It's illuminating the darkness, Pluto. Now, when that happens, it isn't always fun to see what was in the dark. However, it's a good idea. Why? Because that which is hidden, that which is dark, can hurt us because we can turn it even into worse things in our mind. Our fears become rampant because we don't know what it is we're dealing with. And if we have the courage to shine the light, to hold a candle to the darkness even, to see what's there, it may be difficult. It may even be horrifying at first. But once we know what it is, only then do we get to work with it. So this January 18th period of time is a hugely important period of time because the sun makes its alignment with Pluto, shining what's in the dark. Mercury is still beginning its move forward, meaning that all the planets now, except for Uranus, are direct, and Uranus will turn direct just in a couple of days. So we're right at the edge of feeling everything breaking loose and moving forward. And on top of that, on the 20th, the sun moves from Capricorn into Aquarius. And when the sun moves into Aquarius, we're now getting another emphasis, another light, if you will, in that energy of freedom, of new, of exciting, of different, of community, and pulling us out of the intensity of heaviness of responsibility. Now, there's also an important thing to understand here, and that is that both Capricorn and Aquarius are Saturn ruled. Saturn is at home in both of those signs. And so even in Aquarius, we still have this sense of responsibility, but it's not as heavy a personal responsibility. It shifts more to a responsibility to our place in the family, in the community, in the outer world, in the global community even. And so now we have the Sun and Venus and Saturn in Aquarius, and so the Aquarius emphasis is really growing strong here. And in fact, the moon on the 20th, as you can see, is still in Capricorn. But what that means is that by the 21st, actually at 12:53 p.m., the moon has moved into Aquarius, and we have the new moon in Aquarius. Now, the new moon in Aquarius is a special new moon. This is the Chinese New Year. It's particularly early this year because the moon moves into Aquarius while the sun is just one day into its new sign. And so we're really feeling a thrust here into the future. This is exciting. This is important. But the odd thing here is we have a very close, exact for that matter, quincunx between Mercury, which is just moving stationary direct, and Mars, which is also, even though it's been a week and a half, nearly 2 weeks, is moving direct, is still not moving very fast. Remember, Mars turned direct at 8 degrees Gemini and 8 minutes, and it's only at 8 degrees 37 minutes. It's not even moved a half a degree since it turned direct. And now Mercury moving direct moves right into this quincunx, and there is an adjustment that needs to make that we need to make. Again, it's that feeling that even though there's a future unfolding in front of us and it could be incredibly exciting, whether we like it or not, we're moving somewhere and we're going into it, and yet there's still something that needs to be resolved. And that thing that needs to be resolved, this quincunx between how we think stably in the social and in the outer realms, in the realms of responsibility to the outer world, and Mars as to what we're doing with it minute by minute, how we're actually engaging ourselves physically, there's a disconnect. And it feels like we might never get our mental and physical exactly in tune with each other because they're going at different speeds in different directions, and yet they're both moving forward, but they're moving forward as if they're not talking to each other. So this is a very interesting new moon because ultimately it is moving us forward. It is making a statement about what's ahead, but we can't see very far, and we don't have any easy movement here. This is a new moon without any strong trines, or we do have a building sextile to Jupiter, and again, that's the hope of what may be in the future. But even that sextile is, like it's a 3-degree sextile, and so it's a bit wide. And yet we're moving into it. We may feel better about this in the days ahead as the sun actually moves into that sextile with Jupiter, which is not exact until the 24th. But as it does that, I think we'll feel better and better each day about what it is that's going on. But I'm looking at the 22nd when Uranus turns direct. Again, on paper, it'll take a little bit for us to feel it, although there may be a lightning strike that we do feel. It's not going to give its full exposure until it really begins moving forward again. And then on January 23rd and 24th, we have Mercury and Venus both making hard half-square aspects, Mercury with Saturn and Venus with Chiron, but we're still moving toward that sun making a sextile with Jupiter, when for a bit everything's going to feel okay, or whether we have this undying sense of confidence and hope that things are going to be working out. On the 25th, we have the moon moving into Aries and catching up with Jupiter, which again feeds us with this uplifting, this optimistic sense. But we also, by the 26th, have Venus moving into Pisces, and Venus is exalted in Pisces. In Capricorn, Venus has given us some emotional freedom, but she's not quite at home. Matter of fact, she's a bit like fish out of water, because Aquarius is an air sign. And once Venus moves into Pisces, she's in her element. She's emotional, but not overly personalized, and she can be very sweet. She can be very magical, very compassionate. So Venus moving into Pisces really softens the energy all the way around. It takes a little bit of that crystalline, hard-edged, you see, Aquarius has a crystallization aspect to it that is that has sharp edges, and those edges can be very well defined. But when Venus moves into Pisces, it's like putting a sugar cube into water; it melts. And as Venus moves into Pisces, we have the ability to apply that to our own desires, our own attractions, and we can take the hard edges off them and melt a little bit. Now, the month goes out in an interesting way because there's been a lot of movement this month, but not a lot of huge social, global, political shifting going on. Oh, there'll be shifts and there'll be results of what has gone on before. But by the end of the month, we have the Sun on the 29th making a trine with Mars. And we have Mercury now moving direct, making its third and final trine with Uranus. Now remember that Mercury trine Uranus began back in mid-December, and then we had it, again earlier in the month when Mercury was retrograde back around the 8th of January. And now we get it as Mercury moves direct. This is the cleaning up of the energy. By the end of January, we can feel that Mercury moving forward. It's going through things that it had already gone through, but we're moving into new territory. All the planets are moving direct now, and that the Sun trine to Mars also not moving very fast, but now at 9, almost 10 degrees of Gemini, the Sun makes its trine to Mars. Energetically, we feel like we're going somewhere. We feel like we're making progress. And so this is actually I think, a very positive end to the month, and we will see where this takes us. In summary, I think it's important to understand that January is not a breaking free. We've already broken free. It's going to take us months until we're actually moving in through that sense of real freedom. In fact, it'll take until Mars moves completely out of its shadow and into Cancer toward the end of March. It'll take until Saturn moves out of Aquarius and into Pisces in March. And it'll also be when Pluto moves out of Capricorn, where it's been for nearly 20 years, and it dips its toes into Aquarius. But I think that by the end of January, we're seeing that it's a changed game. And I think that, and it feels okay. And I think that January largely is a step into the unknown, but we're definitely moving away from this kind of stuck energy place that many of us have been in, both personally and when we look at the global scene, the global economy and body politic. We can see that the entire humanity has been stuck in this kind of scenario, this swamp, if you will, of what began in 2020 into 2021 and even into 2022, and is now resolving, and we are moving on. So that's it in summary. I look forward to seeing you for the mid-month update. I will give you the URL at that time for the free Zoom webinar on the astrology of 2023, and that will be also made available on a YouTube, and I will let you know that YouTube the following month. That's it for now. As always, think cosmically, but act locally. I'm Rick Levine.